Good morning, everybody. I'm Bob Pianta, Dean of the School of Education and Human Development. On behalf of the President and Provost, I welcome you to the University of Virginia, to the Darden School of Business, and this 2018 Summit on Teacher Retention, a topic of critical importance for the Commonwealth. A couple of housekeeping items. Restrooms are around the corner that way, if you go up and out. I know there were some parking challenges. Welcome to the university. But unlike those of us who actually have to manage the university parking, you guys will get the opportunity for free parking. So even if you parked in a bad spot, just go up to the registration folks and they will take your name and your license plate number and make sure you don't get a ticket. So that doesn't happen every day here. And then some of you may not have received access to the Wi-Fi system here, so if you just raise your hand during the course of the morning, we'll give you one of the Wi-Fi slips. So today's summit is hosted by the Office of the Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the event grew out of discussions that really started over about 2 years ago within the Curry Schools K-12 Advisory Council, a group of school division superintendents and leaders from across the state. When that group was asked to identify the single biggest challenge they faced, the group consensus was that the shortage of qualified teachers was that challenge. That focus led the council to plan last year's summit that largely focused on the supply of teachers, and then when asked to rethink again this year what the single biggest challenge was, the group continued to say that the teacher shortage remained the single biggest challenge and that we wanted to focus on retention, so hence the focus for today. We're all very grateful to the council for their leadership, and I should call out my colleague Stuart Roberson for his leadership of the council. Thank you, Stuart. We are also particularly grateful to partner again this year with the Virginia Association of School Superintendents and the Virginia Department of Education. You'll hear greetings soon from leaders of those organizations. And so we're delighted to have so many leaders in education here today. So today's group consists of school division leaders, leaders from state agencies and the General Assembly, and from stakeholder groups and associations. Our assembling today reflects the collaboration necessary to tackle a problem as complex as that of retaining a strong and effective workforce for our pre-K to 12 students. It is the kind of collaboration among leaders that was present at last year's summit on the teacher shortage, which produced legislation enabling a flexible, direct, and potentially effective way of increasing the supply of teachers, a 4-year undergraduate degree leading to licensure. I know we here at UVA are very excited about using that vehicle to help address the shortage, and I think we should have a similar benchmark for success this year. Again, welcome to everyone. Our agenda promises opportunities to discuss what we know about teacher retention from a wide range of perspectives and should lead us into this afternoon's discussion of solutions. As we launch into the day, let me welcome to the podium Dr. Jeffrey Smith, the president of the Virginia Association of School Superintendents, one of today's sponsors, and Dr. Smith is also the superintendent of Hampton City Schools. Welcome, Dr. Smith.
Good morning. I'm certainly Jeffrey Smith, superintendent of Hampton City Schools and the president of the Virginia Association of School Superintendents. It is my honor to represent the leadership talent of our profession and to share with you that we remain committed to ensuring that our young people graduate from high school with not only the essential knowledge but also the skills to compete in the high demand and high wage arena in which they will move forward in terms of the future. Again today, we're reminded of the unity of our purpose. In essence, we all have the same mission, and that is to ensure that our young people can think critically, communicate well, approach matters with creativity, collaborate and function as a contributing member of a team, and lead productive lives. At the end of the day, we want our young people to be college, career, and life ready. And so today's topic and discussion is an important one as we ensure that the young people of the Commonwealth of Virginia receive a high quality education. It is without question that a high-quality education for our students is certainly directly related to providing them with exceptional teachers and staff members who are committed to the academic and life excellence for all of our learners in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The journey before us is one that comes without an option. Indeed, we're obligated and we must attract, develop, and retain an exceptional staff in order to remain true to our young people and the families that we serve. Nelson Mandela's words are as true today as they were when he first spoke them. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Thank you, and I look forward to our meaningful discussion and the next steps for our over 1.2 million students in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I also want to welcome you to Charlottesville and our Teacher Retention Summit. On behalf of the Virginia Department of Education, sincerely thank you for being here. The Board of Education, as you'll hear from one of our panelists later today, has 3 comprehensive goals. 1 is to focus on equity in our schools. 2 is to focus on the teacher shortages and how we can bring more folks into our profession and retain the teachers that we have. And certainly the 3rd goal is to look at the standards of accreditation and the standards of quality to make sure that we have the best public schools in Virginia. I'm so excited to have this conversation because as a school district leader just recently, I know the challenges that each of you face, whether you're a superintendent, a school board member, a teacher, a principal, or any staff member or advocate for education. And thinking about this issue of how we can make sure there's a high-quality teacher in every classroom. And so I think you're going to see great things today, from amazing data analysis to panels that are really going to provide us insight as we think about moving into the next General Assembly session. I think it's really important for us all to come up with solutions together, because the best ideas will come from this room. I can still remember the summit last year and the amazing outcomes from that moved forward in the General Assembly and led to legislation that made it easier for us to recruit teachers into the field. So again, thank you so much for being here. Excited for the day. Look forward to meeting all of you and can't wait to learn from all of our panelists today. It is my honor to introduce the Secretary of Education, the Honorable Atif Carney.
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope your drive was okay down here, and it's okay if you're parked in the D1 parking lot. I'm parked there too, so if they tow you, they'll probably tow me as well. So we can, but no, Dr. Pianta told us that we're okay with the parking. So thank you for your patience with that, and really appreciate you coming down here. I really appreciate the Curry School of Education hosting us today, and VDOE and VAS along with the Curry School of Education sponsoring this event. I was told my team to stay on topic and on script, and the speech that I practice, because I have a bad tendency of telling a lot of jokes, but I was told that I can tell at least one joke. So that wasn't the joke, hopefully. So, but I am really appreciative of all the teachers that are here, the administrators, the university staff, the members of the education associations and organizations, parents, and local elected official, and I also want to welcome you to the 2018 Teacher Retention Summit here at Darden School of Business. I'm personally very excited for this special convening, and thank you for your willingness to come to Charlottesville on this day to listen and discuss the issue of teacher retention and its effects on our most vulnerable Virginians, our children. And not going off a script too much, but I do want to recognize our team, 2 individuals who really worked hard in putting this together, Chidi Uche and Rose Miner. Please give them a round of applause. Chidi and Rose are both teachers like myself, and I do feel guilty that we have a teacher shortage and we have a bunch of teachers working in the governor's office, but who best to really serve the Commonwealth in an education capacity than our teachers. My secretary is very much Looking forward to working with the Virginia Association of School Superintendents, the Curry School of Education, and the Virginia Department of Education, and all of you to find some substantive solutions and offer recommendations on how to retain our best teachers in the field. Yesterday, I received a phone call from my boss, and I don't mean my wife, but my work boss, the governor, who is on a trade mission, who wanted to be here, but he's on a trade mission because he's trying to bring a lot of businesses to the Commonwealth. And he said that I want to share a video message, and I recorded it. Make sure you show it, and make sure the volume is turned up to max so people can really hear. He is really, really focused on teacher retention. He really cares about our children and really cares about the education in the Commonwealth. So at this time, I want to share the special message with you. Do I just press? Okay, good. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Governor Ralph Northam, and I'd like to welcome you to the 2018 Teacher Retention Summit. Thank you for convening today to talk about a topic that is very important to First Lady Pam Northam and me, teacher retention. Pam has spent many years in the classroom as a biology teacher and a science specialist and has taught children with special needs. I know and understand the challenges that lead to teacher attrition and high rates of turnover, and Pam can personally relate to them. The statewide shortage of qualified teachers in our Commonwealth is only becoming more serious, and the need to reverse this trend is more important now than it has ever been. Teacher salaries in Virginia continue to fall further behind the national average, $9,200 to be exact. But addressing teacher salaries is only one part of the equation. When we look at making policy changes of substance, we have to think about what public education will look like in 20 years. There's a growing demand for expanding access to preschool programs, increasing free community college, and integrating STEM education into our curriculum. We need educators to facilitate this learning, and we must strengthen our teacher workforce by developing and implementing solutions to recruit and retain more teachers. However, to do this effectively, we need to understand how the student population is transforming and address the existing teacher shortage we already have today. In the last 10 years, we have seen a dramatic rise in the number of economically disadvantaged students, along with the number of English language learners in our classrooms. During that same period, the number of our children identified as having special needs and requiring behavioral interventions has also increased. These changing demographics call attention to the mounting pressure that school divisions face to provide academic, social, and emotional support. All of our children deserve a high-quality and engaging learning community, regardless of who they are, where they're from, or what special needs they have. I fully expect that you will consider the role of school leaders and administrators, take into account working conditions and the critical role that positive school climate can play, and recognize the impact that school counselors, psychologists, social workers, and school nurses have in supporting our students and teachers. I hope that during this summit, teachers, administrators, parents, local and state elected officials, and higher education members will use this opportunity to listen, learn, and collaborate, not only to make recommendations on what we should do here in Richmond, but how you, in your role, can support our efforts back in your respective regions and communities. Thank you again for being here today and for your investment in the future of our Commonwealth.
So as a teacher, I know that we provide a valuable service to our future leaders and our students. And as you can see, the governor really believes that as well. From Southwest to the Eastern Shore, from Northern Virginia to Central Virginia, teachers bring strength to the communities they serve. Teachers inspire a love for learning, achievement, and personal growth in their children. A teacher will work tirelessly until a student can decode that difficult word, until she is prepared for the lead in that play, until he feels empowered enough to not just be the first one in his family to apply to college, but then, even with all the cards stacked against him, actually go and then graduate. So I challenge each person here throughout the day to be mindful of what it will look like if the teaching profession was elevated to the highest standard. Value, worth. If we valued our teachers, it would be worth it for them to stay. As we think about retention, we would be remiss if we did not consider what public education should and will look like down the road. We must constantly look to the horizon and think not just about what children need today, but what the next generation will need tomorrow. We all know that there is a growing demand for preschool teachers and for STEM integration in our K-12 system. There is a demand also for work-based learning opportunities and dual enrollment programs. So if we think we need teachers today, I can only imagine how we will desperately need teachers to fulfill these demands for tomorrow. Now is the time to act. We must effectively and efficiently address our most dire needs. As a teacher, I know all too well how low wages affect the morale of educators. We have been so focused on standards of learning when we should have been focused on standards of living. Many of our teachers work multiple jobs to make ends meet for their families. With teacher pay at nearly 20% behind the national average, it's time to make significant changes. But salary is not the only way to mitigate our issues. Teachers really do have superpowers, but they shouldn't have to do it all. Providing additional support is key, and that could take form in many ways. In some districts, it may be additional high-quality leadership, while in some schools, they may need school counselors. Some learning communities may need professional development and trauma-informed care practices, while others need the support of school psychologists. We have always aspired to use sound strategies and judgment to overcome some of education's greatest hurdles. And now more than ever, we need attainable goals, actionable recommendations, and sustainable results. I remind you of my challenge. Be mindful of what it would look like if the teaching profession was elevated to the highest standard. By virtue of being in this room, you have the power to make a huge impact on the 99,000 Virginia teachers who wake up every morning seeking to improve the lives of their students. So with that, let's get to work. And at this time, I want to bring Dean Pianta back up on the stage so we can start with our first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Carney. So I'd just like to offer a couple brief introductory remarks to launch this session on using data to inform policy. And these are culled from a wide range of studies that really reflect kind of national trends, and I think have been summarized in a brief that has been circulated. So just to remind you, I don't think I need to remind everybody in the audience of this, but of all of the factors that we study related to schooling, the factors in which the public invests, facilities, class size, curriculum, the teacher in a student's classroom accounts for the largest proportion of variance in that student's achievement. Said differently, of all the things that schools pay attention to, teachers matter the most. So investing in teaching and in effective teaching, both broadly defined, is really a key strategy that we all have for increasing student performance and addressing gaps. I think we all know that. And like in other states, Virginia is experiencing a chronic teacher shortage, which has doubled over the course of the last 5 years. We know there is a supply problem. We've talked about that over the course of the last year since last year's summit. And yet we also know that nationally, almost 50% of early career teachers leave within the first 5 years of their tenure. And Luke Miller, my colleague, will fill us in on the Virginia data relative to that. These challenges of retaining teachers are made even harder in an economy that is as hot as the one we currently are experiencing with under 4% unemployment, when employers see teachers as a responsible, hardworking, and highly engaged potential workforce. We've also seen noticeable decline in teacher salary over time relative to national levels. The increases that our teachers in Virginia are receiving are not even keeping up with inflation, and since 2000, we've seen an 8% real decline in salaries relative to inflation. Most teachers describe working conditions as challenging. They're being asked to do more, as we heard from the governor. There are noticeable increases in classroom management problems, pressure to increase student performance, changes in assessments, curriculum, and technology all contribute to a range of workplace stresses and problems, and we see these even in noticeable increases in teacher mental health and health problems. And we also notice that, and teachers describe as well, a lack of direct support in their experience for their practice in classrooms. Teachers will describe irrelevant professional development programs, needing much more effective support for principals or supervisors. So even the investments that we are making at many occasions to try to strengthen the teacher workforce and retain them are not often perceived as effective. So this is a system under great strain and stress, even here in Virginia. We're not yet Oklahoma, but the conditions and trends are there. We do know that retention is increased when professional development dollars and programs are devoted to direct supports for teachers' classroom practice, coaching, curriculum work, time for collaboration. We know retention is increased when supervisors work in an aligned and collaborative manner versus a focus on evaluation and drive-by engagements. We know that retention is increased when salary and benefits are competitive. This clearly isn't the entire answer. Most teachers readily acknowledge they will work for less because they love the work. But it's clearly a significant part of it, as we have seen in other states. And we know that, that retention is increased when school boards, community investments in teachers and in teaching provide meaningful career development and advancement opportunities, when there's community support and engagement with the profession, when there are leadership options and reduced barriers to advancement. It's fair to say we'll only see these trends continue or worsen, particularly if the economy stays hot, and that it's time for policies, investments, and programmatic and career supports that create a noticeable break in these trends. So we're going to start with a description of what we know about these trends in Virginia. So let me now introduce my colleague Luke Miller, a research professor in the Center for Education Policy and Workforce Competitiveness of the Curry School and the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. Luke has been leading our efforts to support the work of state and school division policymakers by using available data to inform decision-making. Luke has led efforts on chronic absenteeism, teacher effectiveness, and the teacher shortage, and we look forward to his report on the status of teacher retention in Virginia. Luke.
Thanks, Dean Pianta. I am someone who believes in the power of data. I find data incredibly cool. I hope that the results that I'm going to drop on you now don't feel totally overwhelming, that we'll highlight the broad trends and what the key takeaways I draw from this. And you will also have access to this PowerPoint presentation through the conference's Dropbox at the end of the day. So as Dean Pianta mentioned, I'm part of the Ed Policy Work Center, and one of the driving motivations behind the work that we do is that we seek to develop partnerships with folks in the field, be they at the state level, the division level, the school level, so that the work that we do is actually reflecting challenges and the situations on the ground, and that it is sending information back into the processes that can alter those situations. The work that I'll be presenting today is a first look at teacher retention. I've had the data for 2 months. I've done quite a bit with it, but as you will see, there's lots more to be done. And I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback, and as well as your suggestions for where we can go with this work. So my goal today is to examine patterns in teacher retention that we've seen here in Virginia since the 2005-2006 school year. And in doing so, I'm seeking to inform two things. I'm seeking to inform today's conversations on this issue, as well as the conversations I hope that we have in the days and months ahead, as well as inform the development of a longer range, deeper and fuller investigation into these trends, as well as the patterns and potential policies that we can put in place to try to increase teacher retention. In the analysis that I'll be presenting to you, I'm going to be focusing on school-level retention. The reason why I'm focusing on school-level retention is when we have teacher turnover, that generates a vacancy at the school that needs to be filled. Across the literature, there's folks that focus on division-level retention, which would allow teachers to move across schools within a division and still be retained. State officials may be interested at the system-level retention. Is this individual remaining a teacher in the state of Virginia? I'm going to focus only on only on full-time teachers. This is mostly driven by the fact that part-time teachers have much higher attrition rates, and I don't want to conflate the two. For this study, I am I'm taking the Virginia Retirement System's guidance for defining a full-time teacher, a full-time employee, as someone who has at least 0.75 full-time equivalency across their teaching assignments. And I'm also only focusing on the 132 county, city, and town divisions. I'm not focusing on the regional alternative centers, the regional career and technical education centers. So why am I focusing, why are we all here today talking about this issue of teacher retention? We know from the literature that teacher turnover has a variety of negative effects. As teachers turn over, that leads to reductions in student achievement growth. It also has a negative impact on teacher morale. We all know that there's been a fair amount of effort put into developing, for instance, professional learning communities within schools. If the teachers, the individuals who are the foundation of that community, are changing over, there's a sense of we're not moving forward. That has impact on morale as well as effectiveness. The teachers aren't able to share their craft with their peers. And then, of course, there's the significant costs of hiring. You've got to advertise a position, you've got to interview, you've got to bring that person on board, bring that person up to speed on district or division and school policies. So if high retention is not our desired, if high retention is our desired goal, how high do we want it to be? 0% turnover rate is just not realistic, even if we were to exclude the people who have earned their retirement. That ideally, what we would have is we'd have a zero, what I call, many other people call differential retention, where we would have 0% turnover among folks who are effective teachers, and we'd have 100% turnover of folks who are ineffective and and are unlikely to become effective teachers. I am not dealing with this dichotomy, thank goodness, today. It's very complicated, but this is really an ideal situation. This is where we want. And more of this information on the literature is summarized in that brief that my colleague Veronica Katz wrote up for the conference, for the summit that you had available today, and it's also available online and will be part of the Dropbox at the end of the day. So the data that I am analyzing covers a 13-year period from 2005-06 to last year, 17-18. These data allow me to follow individuals over time as they move across schools, across divisions, as they move up into and out of administrative positions. All the data that I am going to be presenting today was provided very graciously by the State Department of Education. Data fall into sort of these four buckets. I have assignment level data, educational attainment data, licensure data, and then data on school characteristics, all of which I will bring into bear in the results I'll be presenting. So the assignment data tells me all of the individual teacher assignments that an individual may have. I can see if they have what administrative positions they may have. All of that's linked to a school. For each teacher, I'm able to see information on the educational attainment that they have acquired. What's the degree type, the year it was issued, what institution it was received from. From the licensure, I know the type of license they have. I know when that was issued, when it expires or expired. I also know the endorsement area. What subjects is this teacher endorsed to teach in, and when that endorsement was received. It's from the licensure data that I get information on teacher gender, race, and ethnicity. And then in the later years of this time panel, the data also tells me the route that an individual took to be qualified for an individual endorsement, as well as which in-state educator preparation program that they have, and I'll bring that into bear in the analysis. And then at the school level, I have information on enrollment, free and reduced price lunch eligibility, and passage rates on the SOLs. So before turning into retention, I think it's very important that we understand the more macro context in which teachers are making decisions about whether or not to stay at their current school, whether or not to stay a teacher in Virginia. So this graph is showing you two trends. It's showing you, the blue line is showing you trends over the 13-year period in the number of full-time teachers in the 132 divisions. The red line is showing you the trends in the number of students. Things are clearly, we would expect these to move in tandem. As we get more students, we should have more teachers. Over this period, the student population grew by 6.5%, a little over 79,000 students, and you can see that it's increasing every year. On the teacher side, we had that little thing called the Great Recession, which really moved things, sent things a bit of a roller coaster. That over the full period, we see that the total full-time teacher population grew by a little under 800 teachers. But if we look at the period where the Great Recession was really having a contracting effect on the number of full-time teachers, which is 2008 through 12, we see that during that period, there was a loss of almost 5,000 teachers, which is a contraction of almost 6%. That once the education funding started to be returned to the system in 2012, we see that the numbers of teachers start to increase. Those macro trends at the state level vary across regions and vary across divisions within the regions. So this is the map you all know very well of our 8 superintendency regions. And the call-out boxes are showing you the change in both the student and teacher populations over this 13-year period. If you look at the first statistic in each of those, you see that of the 8 regions, 5 saw reductions in student population. If you look at the second row of all of these tables, you'll see that only one region, the northern region, saw an increase in the teacher population. Southside had the largest percentage drop in both students and teachers. Now, what these statistics are masking is that in each of these 8 regions, there are divisions that both grew and shrank with respect to both students and teacher populations. So these are important macroeconomic or macro conditions that we need to keep in mind as we go through the teacher retention analysis. So as I mentioned in the first slide, there are different ways of defining retention. So let me spend a few moments talking about how I define it for today's talk. So I define it in a forward-looking manner, where the question I'm wanting to answer is, where are today's teachers next year? Where are this year's teachers next year? And I'm going to talk about 3 different dispositions. One is that teacher stays, that they remain a teacher at their current school next year. The second is that they transfer, be that within their division or to another division. And then the last is that they exit the state's teacher workforce. I'm defining this again only on full-time teachers. There are some teachers, so this is actually 97% of all individuals with a teaching assignment in the state. If a teacher moves to part-time status, if they're a full-time teacher this year, next year they're a part-time teacher, they still get a retention outcome. That would be classified as either stay or transfer as applicable. And you can see here that this is a very small percentage of all teachers in the state who move from full to part-time status. I also dropped the small number of observations linked to schools in the last year that they're open. If my school is closed next year, I cannot stay. So that artificially restricts my career path decisions. I see 315 schools that close and do not reopen during the period, and there are 41 schools that I see closed for at least 1 year and then reopen. I also, the statistics allow for an individual, while I'm talking about school level retention, there are 2.5% of full-time teachers who are actually have teaching assignments at more than one school within a year. That's all accounted for here in the statistics. Okay, so this is what the retention outcomes looked like in the last year that I can calculate them for, which is the 16-17 school year. So of the teachers who were employed in our divisions in 16-17, 82% of them returned to their same school for the 17-18 school year. 7% of them moved on to a different school, and 11% of them left, were not a full-time teacher the following year. So let's take some of these apart. So those transfers. The majority of these, 58%, are transferring within their division, 42% transfer across divisions. I clumped these together in this analysis because many of our divisions are quite small and maybe only have one elementary school or one high school. If I'm a high school math teacher and I want to get out of my current school, my only option to remain a math high school teacher is to change divisions. On the Exeters, you may be thinking, well, I mean, as Secretary Carney mentioned, he would not be, the year that, last year, 2 years ago, he would be an Exeter. He was not a full-time teacher the following year because he moved up into the state administration. Of these 11% of teachers who are not full-time teachers in 17-18, 17% of them I see moving into administration. Of those folks, about 2/3 of them do so at their current school. A quarter change divisions or move to another school within a division, and 10% move across divisions. Now, this type of attrition may also be this type of teacher turnover may also be something that we want. Has positive things, positive consequences, has a positive effect on our education system. But still, when these individuals stop being a full-time teacher, that creates a vacancy that now needs to be filled. So this graph is showing you how the retention rate, the percent of teachers who remain at their current school, varies across the divisions, and I've got it grouped by the 8 regions. At the very top, you see the retention rate for that region, and you see that there's not a ton of variation across the two. If I can remember this right, so Southwest, Region 7 happens to have the highest, and South Side, Region 8 has the lowest, one of the lowest, but again, there's not a lot of variation across the divisions. There is a fair amount of variation, not a lot of variation across the regions. There is a fair amount of variation across divisions within a region. So that if we look at Region 2, the difference between the division with the highest retention rate and the division with the lowest retention rate is 34 percentage points. The smallest within region difference is in Region 4, where that difference is 15 percentage points. Across the full 132 divisions, there was a division in Region 7 that had a 93% retention rate, and there was a division in Region 2 that had a 56% retention rate. This is highlighting the importance of local context to teachers' decision about whether to say transfer or exit. Here are the same graphs, just now I'm showing you the exit rates. Again, there's not a lot of division, those statistics across the top, there's not a lot of variation in those across the regions. They vary between 9 and 12%. But again, within the regions, there is significant variation, although less than in the retention. And then across all of the divisions, there's a division in Region 1 that had 22% of its full-time teachers not return as a full-time teacher anywhere in the state. And in Region 7, there was a division that only had 4%. Again, highlighting the value of the local region. When I talk about statewide retention rates, I'm going to be focused on these two statistics, the the retention rate and the exit rate. If you're a school level administrator, you're really interested in that retention rate. You want that potentially as high as it can be so that you have less hiring you need to do. The state may be more interested in these exit rates. Are we retaining individuals in our public schools? Now you may also, my retention is looking at this year versus next year. And so you may be thinking, well, I know that there are teachers who leave for at least 1 year and then return. This table is highlighting that. For me, when a teacher leaves for 1 year, that still is a vacancy that needs to be hired, and so I consider that an exit. Of the teachers who I see leaving the classroom, 10% of them return after a 1-year hiatus. a little over 4% return after 2 years, and so on down through about a little less than 2% of teachers who return after a 5-year break. So 80% of teachers who exit have not returned to the classroom within 5 years of their exit. If I look at the first year of data, the 5-6 school year, and look over the full panel of data I have, I can see that 78% of the folks who left full-time teaching at the end of the 5-6 school year still had not returned to full-time teaching 11 years later. Of those who do return to the classroom, the vast majority of them would not be considered stayers. About a third of them who do come back return to the school that they left. The others either move to another school within the division, that'd be 29% of them, and the rest, 37%, are coming back but to a different division. Okay, so before I move into sort of parsing these statistics out by teacher and school characteristics, let me take a step back and bring in some of the literature that is summarized in the brief that Veronica Katz pulled together for today. And that this is going to inform the analysis that I'm going to show you. So across, this is not a small body of literature. There are some very stylized facts that we see taking place in state after state, district after district. And that when we think about for whom is retention the most challenging, it tends to be in certain endorsement areas. So these would be your STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and math, special education, English as a second language. We also see that retention seems to be more challenged for certain types of students, for low-income students, low-performing students, minority students. And the literature that has looked into this suggests that this is not so much teachers not wanting to work with these types of students, but rather the types of schools that these students are being educated in, the working conditions and the school climate there, that's what they want to leave. We also know that from the literature that retention is lower among certain types of teachers. So this would be teachers in the early stages of their career, teachers who are alternately licensed, as well as teachers who are hired late. For those of you who have responsibility for hiring, there's at some point as we get closer and closer to the beginning of the school year where perhaps the most important thing is that you just have a warm body in front of students in the class. Those individuals tend to be retained at lower rates. We also know, as we move our conversations towards thinking about what can be done to shift some of these trends, there is evidence from literature about specific policies that show to be beneficial in terms of retaining teachers. So the first is strong school leadership. This is often cited as a main reason why teachers leave their current school. There are policies out there that have sought to develop strong school leaders. They have then in turn helped improve the school climate. That retains teachers, which then leads to higher teacher morale, effectiveness, and student outcomes. There's also a number of studies that have looked at targeted financial incentives. So the Secretary already talked a bit about the need to raise teacher salaries, but there are other policies that offer additional salary bonuses, salary supplements to teachers of hard-to-staff subjects in hard-to-staff schools, and those have been shown to help improve teacher retention. And then, of course, there's the whole recruitment piece. We're here talking about retention, but recruitment and retention, as we know, are opposite sides of the same coin. So trying to have hiring processes that are infused with better information about potential fit, as well as trying to avoid the late hires, those have also been shown to improve teacher retention. Okay, so I promised you trends. Here's the first trend graph. So let me try to set this up because we're going to see this multiple times. So I've got the years across, at the bottom here, across the x-axis, the percent of teachers on the y. This is showing you the percent of teachers who return to that same school the following year. You can see that as I show you this for the retention, for the transfer, and then next for the exit, you will see if you look at the statistic at the beginning for the 5-6 school year and compare that to the statistic I've already showed you for the 16-17 school year, that we've ended up at the end of this period where we were at the beginning. The bumpiness throughout the period is mostly driven by the financial impacts of the Great Recession. So you see that in 2008, so this would be people in April of May of 2009, who are looking, okay, what do I want to do next year? We see that's when we have a spike. The retention rate spikes to almost 88%. This is partly because there are fewer jobs for them to transfer to. Divisions pulled way back, as we'll see later, on their hiring, and other industries also cut back. So people were saying, okay, there's no other job for me to go to. Maybe I'm happy I've got a job given the current economic situation. Let me stay put. And again, we settle out where we began. I should also point out that these two hashes here on the y-axis is just a little reminder that the height of this isn't from 0 to a certain percent, that I've zoomed in to show you the variation. So here are the transfer rates. Again, we end up at the end of this period where we were at the beginning. The transfer rates drop as we head into the recession, as I just mentioned, about the lack of the reduction in teacher hiring across the divisions. And then it slowly increases back to where we were at the beginning. Here are the exit rates. Again, same story. So what I'm doing here is I'm showing you the trends for the retention and the exit rates. So retention rates, these are people who stay in the same school. Here on the left, and on the right are the teachers who choose not to remain a teacher in Virginia. And I'm showing you trends for 4 different groups of schools. I have taken the divisions and first divided them into the divisions that have, over the full period, see student enrollment growth, and then those who see student enrollment loss. And then within each of those 2 groups, broken them into the groups that have the largest growth versus growth, and then the largest loss versus just loss, for lack of better terminology. That's what we're going to go with today. So what you see here is, first, if you look at the retention rates on the left, you see that as we head into the Great Recession, that they tend to be tightly bunched. And it is after the Great Recession, which is where the student loss really occurs, where the redistribution of students is seen in the state, that we see the retention across these 4 different groups of schools to widen, such that the blue line, these are the schools in divisions that had the largest student enrollment loss over this period. We see that they have the lowest retention rates. The next loss up would be the red. They have the next lowest retention rate. If you ignore the brown group, the group that grew the most, there's something else going on there that is driving teacher retention. And again, we go higher retention rates for the divisions, for the schools rather, in divisions that had growth. You see the same pattern reversed in the exit rates, in that the schools in divisions that had the largest loss of student population had the largest exit rates. Teacher retention is often talked about as a teacher's decision. I've even used those words so far in this presentation. There are several instances where teacher retention is not a decision of the individual, that is made for them. One is reduction in force that may be caused by either student enrollment loss or funding loss. So there's a fair amount of evidence out there that talks about differences in retention based on where an individual grew up. I don't know that in the data, but I do know if they got their undergraduate degree in the state. And we see here that folks who earn their bachelor's degree in Virginia are retained at higher rates and exit at lower rates. I find this interesting, looking at differences in gender. That up to the beginning of the Great Recession, there isn't a difference in the retention and exit rates of males and female teachers. And over this entire time period, it's about 79% female teachers, which is fairly consistent. After the Great Recession, their gender gap opens up about 2 percentage points, where female teachers are less likely to be retained and more likely to exit. If we look at subjects taught, so I'm pulling out those subjects that the literature tells us have struggled the most with retention. So the blue is math, red is science, black is special education, and the brown is English as a second language. We see that, again, after the Great Recession is when the retention of special education and ESL teachers has a different pattern than does the retention of math and science teachers, such that ESL and special education teachers are less likely to be retained and more likely to exit. If I were to put up the trends for transfer, you wouldn't see much difference. So it is this decision to exit. Underlying all of these statewide trends is a well-known pattern between attrition and the age of a teacher. So here, attrition, I'm combining both people who transfer schools as well as exit the system. And you can see that the attrition rates tend to be high for the younger individuals, people who are at the beginning of their career. The attrition rate drops as individuals age and then starts to increase later on. Obviously, this increase in attrition at the older individuals is because they've earned their retirement and have seized it with both hands. At the other end are folks who are leaving their are making changes to their employment decision for one of two reasons. One, they've decided teaching isn't for them and they leave, or that they are searching for a better fit, so they're changing schools trying to find that best fit. I'm not going to tell someone they can't retire, but I think that as policymakers and educational leaders, that we can do things that can influence the retention decisions of teachers in their earlier careers. So that requires that I need to be able to identify first-year teachers. The state data do not indicate that, so I apply these rules to the data to identify individuals who are beginning their teaching career. Here are the trends in that cohort size. So we see at the beginning, so for the individuals who I believe, based on the data that I see, began their teaching career in 2006, 2007, that was almost 8,000 individuals. It plummets all the way down to a little under 4,000 in the first year after the recession starts. So this is the 2009-10 school year, and then begins to increase, but not to where we were before the Great Recession. That the 2007-18 cohort of first-time teachers was still 26% smaller than it was compared to the 2006-7 school year. So when I'm talking about first-year teachers, rather than all teachers in the state, which is what I had been showing you, I'm going to be focusing on the transfer rates, which are shown here in the blue line, and exit rates, which are shown here in the red line. The sum of these 2 points within a year of experience, so instead of having school year on the x-axis, I've got years of teaching experience from their first year in the classroom to their 11th year in the classroom, and again, I still have percentages on the y-axis. The sum of these 2 points is the number of teachers who did not stay in their schools. So at the end of their first year of teaching, 22% of teachers have left that first school that they had. At the end of their 11th year, that that school level turnover rate has dropped to 14%. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is another reason why the retention decision may be taken out of the hands of the individual teacher. I'm wondering if these points, these spikes in exiting the system, which I see for teachers who are finishing their third year of teaching and teachers who are finishing their fifth year of teaching, has to deal with the fact that they maybe did not receive a continuing contract. The 3 year would be people who stayed in their first school for those 3 years. The 5-year might be people who at the end of the second year, they realize, I'm probably not going to get a continuing contract here. Let me try to find a better fit. They come up at 5 years, and perhaps that is something that's underlying those trends. Another way to think about the retention of first-time teachers is to think about how long until they separate, their first separation. Either they first choose to exit the system, or they first choose to leave that first school that they begin their teaching career at. So those are the statistics that I am showing you here. So what this is telling you the percent of teachers who remain. The blue line are saying these are the percent of teachers who remain a teacher somewhere in Virginia. The red line is showing you the percent of teachers who remain at that school where they began their teaching career at. When these statistics are shown, we tend to focus on the 50% line. If we take that 50% line out to where it intersects with the blue line, we see that after 11 years, 50% of first-time teachers are still a teacher somewhere in the state. But it's after 4 years that 50% of first-time teachers have already chosen to leave their first school, either to transfer to a different school or to exit the system. So this is getting at the statistic that Dean Pianta was talking about. So again, 50% of first-time teachers have left that first school after 4 years. Okay, so now let's bring in those school characteristics that the literature suggests are important. So here I am taking schools and dividing them into 4 groups based on the percent of their students who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. Again, I've got transfer rates on the left and exit rates on the right. You see that if you look at the transfer rates, that as student poverty increases, as we move from the blue up through to the brown line, that more and more teachers, a higher percentage of teachers are transferring, are leaving their school, and that remains constant across the first 11 years of these teachers' career. Similar pattern is seen over in the exit rates, but the differences aren't as stark. Here is the same idea behind a graph, but now I'm breaking up the schools into 4 groups based on their reading pass rates on the SOLs. If you look at the transfer rates, the schools that have the lowest passage rates, the blue line, have the highest transfer rates, and it works its way down to the brown line, the schools that have the highest pass rates. If I were to show you the math statistics, which are in a supplementary slide at the end, a similar pattern shows here. Now, I want to bring in information on the race and ethnicity of first-year teachers. A couple of years ago, there was a statewide task force on the diversification of the teacher workforce. And if we're going to increase the diversity of our teachers, we need to start with who we're bringing into the field. So we see here that over these cohorts of first-time teachers, 80% are white, 13% are African American, 4% are Hispanic, and then 3% are of some other race or ethnicity. There has been over the cohorts, there has been a slight decrease in the percent white and a slight increase in the percent black. I'm going to show you those same transfer rates and exit rates for the African American, Hispanic, and white teachers, but I want to sort of give a little bit of caution in that there's a fair amount of missing data here. 10% of first-time teachers, I don't observe their race or ethnicity in the licensure data. This is caused by some changes in the way the department has collected this. And you can actually see that in the 2013 cohort, so these are people who started their teaching career in the 13-14 school year, that I'm missing race and ethnicity for about 1/3 of those individuals. So there's a good chunk of people who are not represented in these graphs. So on the left, again, we see the transfer rates. Again, the blue line is African American teachers, the red are Hispanic teachers, and the black line is the white teachers. there's not a lot of difference in their transfer rates over these first 11 years of their career. However, if we switch over to the graph on the right, we see that there is a fair amount of differences in the exit rates, that African American and Hispanic teachers are much more likely to exit the Virginia teacher workforce over the first 5 years than are white teachers. But of those individuals who remain teaching after their 5th year, there's not a lot of difference in the exit rates across these 3 groups of teachers. So that the challenge to our mission about teacher diversity is in those earliest years of their career. Okay, so I want to bring in license type. Across these first-time teachers, there are essentially 5 license types that they start their career with. 23% of them start with a collegiate professional license. 29% begin with a postgraduate professional license. These are the 5-year renewable licenses. The remaining teachers come in with some type of a provisional license. Either it's the straightforward provisional license, the provisional license for special education teachers, or the career switcher. Again, these licenses are all they're limited to a certain number of years and are not renewable. Look at the transfer rates. Not a lot of differences between the, for these graphs, I'm taking all of those 3 groups of provisional licenses and putting them into one group. But again, we see differences in the exit rates across the license types, such that individuals who start their career with a provisional license have higher rates of turnover, again in those earlier years where they're trying to satisfy the remaining requirements for a professional license. And we see higher rates for folks who come in with a graduate degree than those who come in with a bachelor's degree. So I had mentioned at the beginning that later in this observation period, the Office of Teacher Licensure starts to keep electronic records of the way in which an individual teacher became eligible to receive an endorsement in a given subject area. So each teacher will have one route to endorsement. Sometimes in literature this is called pathway. They will have one route for each of their endorsed areas. When I look across the first-time teachers, 73% of them start their career with 1 endorsement, 21% have 2, 5% have 3, and there are a little less than 2% who have between 4 and 7 endorsements. I need to look into that. The state identifies 12 different ways in which teachers can qualify for an endorsement, and they're grouped into these 4 broad categories. So that's completing an approved in-state preparation program, completing an alt route, qualifying through some various reciprocity agreements, and finally taking a test in a subject area to earn that endorsement. So this piece of information was added to electronic licensure records in 2013 so that I have good coverage on it for the last 4 cohorts, 2014 through 2017. Here's how that route to endorsement varies across these individuals. Again, keep in mind that an individual will have multiple routes if they have multiple endorsements. So 34% of our first-time teachers have earned an endorsement, a teaching endorsement, a license endorsement, because they completed an approved in-state program. 31% have qualified through an alternate route, 37% through reciprocity, and then 6% for testing. There are multiple routes within the alt route and the reciprocity. I've listed the 2 most popular ones. Here, because this information comes in very late in my observation window, I can only look at retention by route to endorsement over the first 3 years of a teacher's career. We see that first, all of these lines are relatively straight with a bit of shifting in the 3rd year for the exit rates. And we see that for transfer rates, The folks who completed an in-state program tend to have slightly higher transfer rates. The reciprocity has the lowest. But when we move over to exit rates, the differences between these three routes grow, such that the folks who completed an in-state program are about 9 percentage points less likely to leave the classroom than are folks who came in through a reciprocity agreement. The last piece of data that I will drop on you looks at the preparation programs that these first-time teachers came through. So again, this is going to be this 34% of them that earned an endorsement by completing one of these programs. There were 37 programs that had at least one of their completers begin their career during these 4 years. 18 of those 37 programs had at least 100 individuals begin their teaching career, and 19 had less than 100. You see that James Madison, Old Dominion, and George Mason are the major workhorses in this area for the state, and behind them are Liberty, Longwood, Virginia Commonwealth, and Radford. There's a lot of focus in the literature on the relationship between the preparation individuals get either from an approved program or through one of these other routes, and how that relates to their retention behavior. So given that 2 slides ago we saw that those the transfer lines and the exit lines were relatively flat over those first 3 years, what I'm going to show you here is an average transfer rate across those 3 years. And an average exit rate. So here are 29 of those 37 programs. I'm only showing you the transfer rates for programs that had at least 60 teacher year observations, just to remove some of the noise. And we see that across these 29 preparation programs, that there's a 14 percentage point spread in the transfer rates of their completers who become teachers in the state. There's a slightly smaller spread when we look at the exit rates. There's 11 percentage point spread. This raises all kinds of questions, right? I mean, you've got differences across the programs in the subject areas that their graduates are being endorsed in, and we know that relates to their retention. We likely have differences in the types of schools that they're going to. There's all kinds of really interesting things to dive into here that can leverage the strengths that we have in our preparation programs to help improve retention in the state. So across these 29 programs, there are 19 of them that have a higher transfer rate than exit rate. This suggests that maybe these students are again, looking for a fit rather than second-guessing their decision to become teachers. And there are 9 programs that have a higher exit rate than transfer rate. So again, some variability to dive further into as this work progresses. So I'm amazingly on time because I want to allow a bit time for questions. So let me give you what my key takeaways are from all of those numbers that I've just shared with you. Again, I'm thinking about takeaways to inform the conversations we'll be having today and in the future. So I think it's really important that we try to more deeply understand the consequences of the Great Recession for the education system in this state. Yes, there was the major reduction in spending that is slowly being returned to the system, but that the Great Recession really changed the distribution of students and thus teachers within the state. And understanding the relationship between context on the ground, not just in the school but in the community, to teacher retention, I think is going to be very important here. Again, there's significant, I showed you that there was significant variation across divisions in teacher retention. Again, this suggests to me that there's some differences in the local level that are driving that, and it's important to understand that. I also was very interested with this emergence of the gender gap. I don't have any theories at this moment to what may drive that. But given that females make up the majority of our teachers, if they're being retained and exiting at higher rates, that definitely has implications for teacher retention. I also showed that that's really, if we're thinking about improving retention, we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck, if I can steal an economist phrase, if we focus on beginning teachers. And again, 50% of first-time teachers have left their first school after 4 years, and 50% of all first-time teachers are still teaching in Virginia after 11 years. There's the associations between the student poverty and the academic performance that were fairly stark, as they are in many other locations. And again, understanding how working conditions and school climate connect to that, I think, is very important. I showed with the diversity statistics, if we look at the exit rates, that the challenge there is really figuring out ways to keep our minority teachers in the classroom during those first 5 years of their career. Then there's some other things I found interesting that speak to policies areas that policy can address. So remember, the provisional individuals who start the career with a provisional license have higher exit rates. This suggests that some teachers are struggling to make that transition to a provisional license, and at the end of those 3 years, they may be forced to leave the classroom. Understanding exactly what they're struggling with there and how we may improve that it has some promise. There's also if only 34% of individuals are receiving an endorsement because they complete an in-state program, the reciprocity agreements that we have are a big way and a big source of supply to our schools. Yet they had higher exit rates. What's going on there? That's something I'm interested in looking at. And then finally, the variation across preparation programs, I think, is beneficial. So I mentioned that this is early stages. I've had the data for 2 months. This is a high-level descriptive analysis. Cool though it may be, there's more I want to do with it. And I think there's some additional data that would be nice to bear. First is understanding the individual students that these teachers teach. Are certain subgroups of students experiencing teacher turnover more than others? Bringing information on the salaries that they earn. I've been working for a number of years with undergraduate students to create a database of division salary schedules, which can be brought to bear here. The working conditions and school climate, I mentioned throughout, is important here. Hopefully, if our communication strategies have worked, you're all aware of the working conditions and school climate surveys that I'm working with the Department of Education to administer statewide this January through March. I think one of the values of those responses to those surveys is bringing that to bear on this study of teacher retention and teacher supply. And also bringing in information on the community characteristics, particularly in rural communities, a particular interest of mine, that there's a very strong connection and identity sharing between schools and communities that I think, given the macro trends going on in the state, is important to understand its connections to teacher retention. Again, if I mentioned this, more work on preparation programs. I'm also very interested, while I love data and can be very happy crunching numbers, I do think it's very important to get out and understand from the local level what are the challenges that they believe they're facing, and what they're doing, what you all are doing to try to improve retention efforts. And then, of course, the other side of this coin, the recruitment. If we are able to recruit teachers who are more likely to want to remain teachers, that we're able to recruit teachers that have a better fit to that school, that will help us with retention. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions, and there are folks with mics who will come around so you can ask the question so that I and the rest of us can hear. I hope that my data presentation didn't lull you into a snooze. There's a question down here in the front, Diane.
Wait for the microphone, please.
Hello. My question is, have you looked at educational support staff in the buildings? I'm interested in how that might impact, well, number one, their retention, but also teacher retention in those particular buildings and how that would vary.
Yep. So I have not touched that data at all, but I do have in the data that I received information on those positions, and the literature does suggest that there is a connection. If teachers are having to wear multiple hats or taking on more responsibilities in the school because there aren't those support staffs, that has been shown to be detrimental to teacher retention. And so that is something that I'm very interested in looking at.
I have a question of your 82% retention rate.
Yes.
Have you looked into how many of those 82% have looked at either transferring or trying to find a different job and then end up staying in the profession maybe for benefits or pay or whatever?
So I haven't, and the data that I have access to at this point do not allow me to. So what you're getting at is what I can see in the data from the state is the actualization of a teacher's desire to change jobs. If I'm a teacher and I really would like to change jobs, but I can't because either I can't find another one, or I've got a partner who can't change jobs and can't move across state, I may want to not be retained, but I don't have that flexibility. There are some studies out there in the literature, some studies by a colleague, Jim Wyckoff of mine here, using data from New York City, where they had they have a system in place where individuals can sort of apply to a central bank saying, I would like to leave my school, I'm interested in applying to that school. So you can get at this intention bit rather than just relying on the realization of that. I think to do that here in Virginia, which I would love to look at, requires those partnerships that I was talking about at the beginning and sort of guide the work that I do. That some of that information may be held in some divisions, as well as talking with individual teachers. And I believe later on today, Dr. Johnson will be talking about some of the exit survey work. And she may her data may be able to speak to that better than the data I have access to.
Wonder if you might speculate a little bit. Fascinating presentation, by the way, appreciate it very much, about some of the more qualitative aspects that could have significant impact on the quantitative data you present. So some of the things that I'm thinking about that maybe you've studied or maybe you can speculate about are things like perceived sense of satisfaction with work, the culture of the school, the career readiness and the sense of self-efficacy with respect to being successful as a teacher. And then salary certainly, but then this kind of broad-based thing that many of us are speaking about, the general public perception of teachers and the blaming of schools and the over-reliance on testing and all those kinds of factors that affect one's perceptions about and satisfaction with the work. So the qualitative pieces are really fascinating, but diving a little deeper into the qualitative dimensions, I wonder if you might speculate about.
Yeah, so this is a great opportunity for me to plug the working conditions survey, because through that survey, we will collect information that can get at many of these things. So there are questions on there, and the surveys are up on the department's website. Just look for School Climate, Virginia Department of Education, and the working conditions and the school climate surveys are there for you to look at. There are questions on there that ask about teachers' view of how they believe policy respects or doesn't respect them as an educator. The leadership ability they have, the degree to which they are trusted to make curricular decisions, instruction decisions. And I think that is getting at some of what you're talking about, the sense that schools and teachers are under attack for failing our society, failing our kids. That many of those pieces can be gotten at on a large scale through that survey. But again, connecting to what I was saying earlier about the desire to connect to add to the data these stories from the field. They add richness to the statistics that then when these are shared with folks like yourself or at the state level who have the ability to influence policies, I think that together a story and large-scale data has a much larger impact.
Too quick.
So
One.
where are you?
I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, I just had a voice.
Too quick. One is all of the data that's been collected, and it's wonderful, is from the time period once SOLs were firmly established and have been the norm of the day. Do we have any comparison data related to 95 or 90 to 2000 pre-SOL data that we might be referred to?
So we may, the department may. The department has data. My understanding is that there were some changes in the way the data were collected, which is one of the reasons why the data I was provided with didn't go back before, as you're saying, that the SOLs came into place here. But even while there may not be individual teacher level data, there may be some more aggregate data that the department has that can speak to, I assume what you're interested in is the role that this increased focus on testing has on teacher turnover.
Yes.
So that can be, so if there were data that have information on teacher retention prior to the introduction of the SOLs, that's one way to get at that. The other way to get at that is there's variation within the schools here on SOL performance. The idea being, I would think that schools that have lower pass rates, that for those that the presence of state testing has a stronger influence on teacher retention decisions of teachers in those schools, whereas you then turn over to the schools that have a low passage rate, that the presence of those tests and the way their students are performing on those tests may have a stronger impact there. Okay.
One other, the exit surveys, are there any plans to match the places where the retention is low with the exit surveys data?
So I cannot answer that question. I don't know if Denise is in the room now and she wants to jump in, or we can just hold that question. We'll hold that question until Denise's presentation this afternoon. There's a question down here in the middle.
We have a question up here.
Up in the back. Sorry.
I wanted to know if you saw with the teacher preparation, like the different colleges, and if there was any difference in the programs that had more online learning versus in-person learning.
So I have not. I have not looked at that. What I've done is what you've seen here. But I think that speaks to. There has been work, again, by a colleague of mine here, Jim Wyckoff, and some of his colleagues, that collected information on the experiences in the preparation programs of two cohorts of entering teachers in New York City, and were able to connect aspects of that training to both their retention in the classroom, but also their effectiveness. And the key thing that came out of that was the student teaching. I don't believe at that point this study was done in about 2005-06, so the online presence wasn't something that was part of that. But there may be, and that can be something that can be collected and brought to bear on this data. And there may be folks who, there's a lot of work out there being done on the relationship between experiences during a preparation program and their experience in the classroom. And that online presence may be part of what some other folks are looking at.
We've got to hold it there. I hope you'll join me in saying thank you. That was remarkable presentation, both in terms of, Luke, thank you for the level of depth in which you analyzed the thoroughness of the analysis, and just the clarity with which you presented it. I think was a model for the way in which we can use data available to us to drive some policy decisions. One of the things I thought was kind of remarkable, and I don't know whether this is a fair takeaway from that, but it does seem like, given this, the focus that the data tells us around that early career period, that clearly growing our own teachers, following our teachers as they move from our preparation programs out into the field, and being systematic in the way that we align to the opportunities that are in the field, both in terms of what our programs emphasize and the kind of support we provide to teachers, could be a real way forward out of this. Next, we're going to hear from some of the more trusted voices in the field. They'll offer some much needed context and insight into the challenges with teacher retention and provide a level of complementary information around the presentation we just heard. So without a doubt, their experiences inform the work and discussions we're trying to have take place here today. Facilitating this panel will be Secretary Carney, so please join me in welcoming Secretary Carney and the panelists to the stage.
I'll call the panelists one by one, but before I do, I know we've been sitting for a while. If you want to take 15 seconds to stand up and stretch and sit back down, thank you.